Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Earthly Headlines. Today I got a really cool episode. There's been some more light shed on the ancient Beringian ice sheet land bridge migration that a lot of people think was the first migration. What I'm talking about is the Clovis first model. I'm not disputing that it never happened. It happened. Clovis people got there through the Beringian land bridge. There's no doubt about it. But the fact that they were the first to enter North America is just ridiculous. That's all I was saying. But it definitely happened, and so there's more data that has come out of the study. And actually, they did it in 3 separate studies, and we're going to talk about them in a second. Just to fill in some context if you guys are new to the subject. The peopling of the Americas has been largely debated for a long time. They found these population of people that they named the Clovis culture because of the first remains were found around Clovis, New Mexico. And they had a distinct type of tools that the archaeologists used as an identifying marker. So they found, after Clovis, they found a few other, quote, Clovis sites that aren't necessarily from Clovis, New Mexico, but they just call them Clovis sites based on the tools. I did a video a few weeks ago talking about certain finds that kind of throw a monkey wrench, not into the Beringian model, but into the Clovis first model. So apparently there was an older group living there who had different types of tools that weren't Clovis tools. They found a few of their sites, but the video that I did a few weeks ago centers on the site found in Texas, I believe. Anyway, this study, I think, took about 5 years, the 3 studies, and this is what they came back with. And the reason why they didn't do these further date studies, and I'm talking about there was a Native American tribe that exists today that they had the remains of this guy that they found in Nevada called Spirit Cave, and his remain, I think he's about 10,000 years old, around there, maybe 11,000 years old, something like that. And they have custody of his body, so to speak, and they refused any scientist to come in and do some dating on his bones because they didn't. Usually dating is destructive. If they were to give up his body, they probably wouldn't be able to get it back until the technology got pretty advanced to where one scientist and his team approached this group, and they said, all we need is like a piece of an ear, the bone next to the ear, as part of the skull, and some like very little. It's in this article anyway. So that's why they were able to get all these new findings now after such a long time, because they were having trouble getting these samples in the first place. So let's just get into all the work. Like I mentioned before, there's a place called Spirit Cave in Nevada. It dates to 11,000 years, not 10,000. So 11,000 years, a man died there. We'll just call him the Spirit Cave Man. They recovered and analyzed his DNA after receiving permission, along with 70 other ancient people whose remains were discovered throughout the Americas. I think there was a boy in Montana, and then there was somebody in Arizona, I think, among a bunch of other people. Basically, they want to clear up the largely muddled picture of how and when humans spread across the Western Hemisphere. By the way, this is from the New York Times, and I'll have a link to it in the description. So the New York Times author says, the earliest known arrivals from Asia were already splitting into recognizably distinct groups. The research suggests some of these populations thrived, becoming the ancestors of the indigenous people that we know as the Native American Indians. So they say it's the earliest known arrival just because they're pretty cautious. There have been other hypothesized arrivals, which we'll get into toward the end of the video, from Easter Island and the Aboriginal people of what ultimately ends up being traced to the Aboriginal people of Australia. But so these arrivals come from Asia. Some groups died out entirely from this migration, but others kept going all the way to the southern tip of South America. So the ones that died out entirely, there's this concept called genetic cul-de-sacs. So if you guys think of a cul-de-sac, it's almost like a dead end, basically. So if you're a family or a group of people, let's say 50 people or something like that, or maybe less than that, 25 people, eventually you're going to run out of people to mate with, and eventually you become infertile, and that's at the end of the road for you guys unless you get absorbed into another population. So that's one huge hypothesis about why these sparse groups died out. And another one is warfare. That's always a hypothesis, although there's no direct evidence of that. That could always be something, or just a culture shift. They just get absorbed into the main group. They get absorbed back, and their genetics get absorbed into the main herd of people, so to speak. But anyway, in either case, it doesn't really matter. It's not that important. Other groups died out entirely that derived away from the main migration. So at the end of the last ice age, the story goes, the people moved into the Americas, so about 12,600 years ago, around there, going from Siberia to Alaska, and just for visual sake, up here. So here's the Bering Sea. You can see all this. This is the light blue is shallower water, and then the darker it is, the deeper it goes. And all this at the time was a land bridge that connected, because the waters were shallower and all that stuff. A common misconception is, oh, this was all covered by a glacier and they walked across the glacier. That's not entirely true. It was mostly because the glaciers had yet to melt and the sea level was a lot lower. And then they went all the way down to the south. Anyway, I digress. Until recently, geneticists could offer very little into the inside of these migrations. They just knew or they were musing about what happened. And then this latest batch, suddenly a new can of worms have been opened. A lot of it has confirmed a lot of these hypotheses, and others there's even more questions, which will probably, I think, it's not insurmountable to get the answers to those questions within a few years. They just need to study the right things. And I think a lot of the issue is just getting the permission to get those bones and remains to study. The researchers have recovered the genomes of 229 ancient people from teeth and bones. That's what it was, teeth and bones. That's what they got permission to analyze. Before we continue, let me pull up this graphic, which is really interesting. So here on the top left, you can see Alaska and the northwestern part of Canada. And about 16,000 years ago, this is right at the end of the last ice age, like less than 4,000 years before the Younger Dry Ice event. About 16,000 years ago, the ancestors of living indigenous Americans split into two main branches. So right here, you see this big, and these waves were ongoing for a long time. So in this initial wave, a lot of them, they weren't all just traveling in one large group. Some of them would stop and just settle where they were. So they're ancient Siberians, or they call them the ancient Beringians now, that settled and became the ancient Beringians in Alaska, and slowly but surely they started going through. Now, I shouldn't say slowly but surely. They populated most of North and South America within a few hundred years. So it was really fast, but a lot of them did stay along the way, and they stopped. They kept going, and then they branch off into two groups. One stays in North America, Canada, and they go northeast around here. And then the other keeps going down south, and they eventually reach the southern tip. And then some of them branched off and headed east as well, across the length of North America, or the current United States. So that's where they found the ancient Montana boy. And then they passed through the Spirit Cave, which is in Nevada. And then 14,000 years ago, the southern branch split into new branches that rapidly spread into South America. And 9,000 years ago, a wave of people from North or Central America replaced older populations in South America. That's a key footnote right there. They replaced older populations in South America. So there were already people living there when they got there. That's huge to the understanding here. By at least 4,200 years ago, and by the way, these are really conservative estimates. They're just going by what they found. These numbers are just a ballpark range. I'm sure there are exceptions and all that, but 4,200 years ago is not that long ago, by the way. A group of people related to ancient Californians had become widespread in the central Andes. So people from up here definitely came down here because they have the genetic marker. In the Andes, by the way, we've talked about it in the past episodes. there's something going on in those mountains. Like there's some sort of life-giving property or something, because there are people who live ridiculously long lives who live there, and not just people who were born and raised there. I mean, people who visit from first world countries with ailments, they go, and then their lives change, and it does wonders for their longevity. So anyway, back to the article. So they get all this data, 229 ancient people, and then one of these people happens to be a very rare individual, the only second so-called ancient Beringian whose DNA has ever been analyzed. So the first one was studied by Dr. Willerslev. He studied one of these people. It was an 11,500-year-old girl whose remains were found in eastern Alaska. And then the second was discovered hundreds of miles away in western Alaska. And that person lived 9,000 years ago. So Dr. Willerslev studied these people, these two specimens to be exact. The ancient Beringians, they separated from the ancestors of living indigenous people in the Americas about 20,000 years ago. So remember how I mentioned there were people who just stopped and settled in Alaska? That happened 20,000 years ago. So the people in other words, that means 20,000 years ago, those people stopped and settled while the other people kept going and became the Native Americans we know now. So this migration started a long time ago. But they didn't decide to go all the way down until about 16,000 years ago. So that's a working hypothesis anyway, and that DNA evidence is coming out now that's strongly supporting this view. Then they disappeared, leaving no known genetic trace in living people. Maybe genetic cul-de-sac, whatever it is, they died out. Probably because there weren't enough people willing to live there, right? Because it's so cold. Another wave of migrants from Siberia did not stop in Alaska. They kept going. They hit the giant glaciers, the 2 mile thick glaciers, and then they split into two branches. Like I said earlier, one went east, the other kept going south. So the genetic data suggests that this group spread swiftly. About 14,000 years ago, the expansion may have taken only centuries. So that's according to the genetic data. They got there quick. How long does it take to walk and found all these villages and stuff? Not that long, apparently, to walk all the way down to South America, the southern tip of South America. It's an explosion. And what spurned this migration? That would be interesting too. Probably most likely climate, but there's probably other reasons as well for it to be a giant explosion like this. I digress. The man from Spirit Cave in Nevada belonged to the so-called southern branch of Migrants. He was closely related to the 12,700-year-old boy on the other side of the Rocky Mountains in Montana. So the Montana boy. The man from Spirit Cave also to have a close genetic link to a 10,400-year-old skeleton in Brazil. So this is the thread that links all these people. And you can see the further north they find these specimens, the older they are. And so it makes sense that the younger ones are here. Although the Spirit Cave guy is he 11,000 years old? Yeah, he's 11,000 years old. It's very interesting that they all share the same genetic markers. So they uncovered another link between the ancient Montana boy and this woman in Chile, the skeleton in Chile. And the kinship suggests that migrants moved quickly from North and South America. We already established that. So about 9,000 years ago, this is interesting, both teams found additional waves of people move southward. So there are more waves, right? So all these arrows are indicative of more waves. So then this is where they have Dr. Willerslev and Dr. Reich. They have two differing opinions. Willerslev thinks the new arrivals mixed with the older South American populations already, whereas Dr. Reich thinks it's evidence of two waves of migrants who had completely replaced the people who had lived in South America before. So that's one of the differing opinions here. I tend to think there was already people living there, and they either drove them out or they just integrated with them because they had the sheer numbers. The new research also says of remarkable continuity, kinships that span thousands of years. Dr. Willerslev compared the genome of the man from the Spirit Cave to those of 4 sets of remains found in nearby Lovelock Cave, who are considerably younger, 600 years ago. And again, They're closely related. So over 10,000 years of genetic history they share together, these people. And it's incredible. It's unbroken. They're essentially the same genetics until the Europeans came, and then everything became a melting pot. All these people were closely related. His team found, despite being separated 10,000 years of history, similar bond was found in the Andes. This is also really interesting. So John Lindo of Emory University, in a separate, the third genetic study that I was talking about, his colleagues analyzed DNA from 7 people who lived at high elevations between 6,800 and 1,400 years ago. So the high elevations here, like I said, some of these people went to the southern tip and went along the coast. Other people just went up. A huge contingent of people went up and just stayed and separated from the lowlands. I think I covered that in another video. These highlanders at high elevations, they were willing to just live up there, and they were good, and they just lived there for thousands and thousands of years. So Dr. Lindo, he found that the people who lived above 7,500 feet in the mountains were separated from the lowland populations 9,200 and 8,200 years ago. So he has a date of when that branching off happened. So even today, the mountain people there, they have a strong genetic link to the ancient remains of the guy from the Spirit Cave. So that is really interesting just to see how that happened, because according to Dr. Reich, that's not something that's common. But I mean, you would expect that to happen, right? If you have this ancient population of people swooping down, and if they lived there and they stayed there and didn't get conquered by any foreign entities, then it makes sense that the genetic pool would be preserved there. Really interesting stuff. So here's another discovery, or another idea that you guys can kind of marinate on. A few years ago, Dr. Reich found that some living people in the Amazon carry some DNA that's most similar to that of people who lived in Australia and New Guinea. So here's New Guinea, here's Australia. And then if you follow these strings of shallow water, and remember, shallow water means that all this stuff was above sea level once upon a time, 12,000 something years ago, before the end of the last ice age. And if you follow it, this prick here, this pin drop, is Easter Island. And from Easter Island, you can see you directly go to Chile here, which is where they found one of the remains. And those people share DNA with these people. So go figure, right? Gee, I wonder how that happened. So they might be the population with this DNA here who migrated to South America way before they crossed Siberia. And that's where the research is heading now, to investigate this proposed migration. Because the Beringian model, this started out as speculation as well, until all this DNA evidence has exonerated it. So this model is following that same path here. So the researchers speculated that their ancestry included an unknown group, which the scientists called population Y. So yeah, that's the genetic marker, population Y. Some of these people in the Amazon had it, and they think that traces back to an ancient population who separately made their way from Australia and New Guinea. Dr. Reich and his colleagues didn't find any trace in their study, but Dr. Willerslev's team did, in the 10,400-year-old skeletons in Brazil. So how did this happen? Well, that's the next step. So the article poses two. So these are the two main arguments, then, the two main proposals. Another group of Asians entered the Americas long before the ancestors from Beringia, or they interbred with and then they ended up interbreeding with the people in the Amazon before disappearing. Or the alternative is perhaps the early members of the southern branch being here, this migration, they just had these weird genetic markers, some odd genes that ended up surviving, which I think is the odds of that happening are way lower. That just doesn't make sense to me. So what do you guys think about this? I think this is super interesting. Just looking at the shorelines, you can show this to a child, and I'm sure they could figure it out for themselves. I mean, this is ancient Sunda land here. All of this Indonesia. Remember, I've talked about this in a bunch of videos already. All of these were just together. This is a supercontinent here. Same thing with Australia. All of this was connected, and even all the way to Easter Island. And then Easter Island has this weird Rongo script that is not comparable to anything else extant today. And they found the same people, the same DNA from the people who come from Australia. And then the indigenous people of Australia, they claim that they didn't even come from the African gene pool, that their gene pool is way different. So there's a lot going on here, and it spans a variety of different subjects: anthropology, paleontology, archaeology, linguistics, cultural studies. It's just endless. So let me know what you guys think. What, after seeing these images and hearing about this, do you guys have any hypotheses? Is there another, aside from these two models, is there another model that you guys know about? Let me know in the comments, and I'll talk to you guys tomorrow.